A soldier returns home to visit his daughter after a brutal battle between Iran and Israel. But just as he reaches the front yard, a terrified scream from a child tears through the silence. It is his daughter, the little girl found in a bruised condition. The secrets he uncovers afterward truly terrify him. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from. And subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. Sergeant David Vance returned to his suburban haven under the cloak of a moonless mid-autumn night, a profound weariness etched into his very bones after a grueling tour of duty in the scorched lands between Iran and Israel. He had just eased his dust-caked pickup truck, a vehicle that had seen better days, into the narrow, rain-slicked driveway when a sudden soul-shattering shriek, impossibly high-pitched and filled with terror, tore through the otherwise still air emanating from within the confines of his own home. He had been away for nearly 5 arduous months, a span of time consumed by the brutal realities of armed conflict, devoid of the comforting presence of his beloved daughter, Imani, and bereft of any letters or photographs that might have bridged the vast distance. His solitary objective had been singular and unwavering: complete the assignment, survive the ordeal, and return to the embrace of his family. His military-grade backpack, heavy with the dampness of the persistent drizzle, slapped rhythmically against his back as his left hand instinctively tightened its grip on the strap, while his right, with a familiar gesture born of habit, sought out the spare key, which he had always meticulously concealed beneath the subtle glow of the porch light. The front door yielded to his touch, opening with a profound, almost unsettling silence, and as he stepped across the threshold, a suffocating wave of artificial aroma assaulted his senses. A potent blend of sickly sweet vanilla and an aggressive chemical rose fragrances he had never under any circumstances sanctioned for their dwelling. The ceiling above diffused a soft, almost ethereal glow from an array of cool white LED strips. An unfamiliar alteration in the familiar comfortable couch had inexplicably been reupholstered in a stark, unfamiliar fabric. A single unscented candle flickered with an unnerving steadiness upon the dining table. David Sarah's voice, a tone of feigned surprise rather than genuine unsettling, drifted from the kitchen's deeper recesses. She emerged, wiping her hands meticulously on a pristine apron, a picture of domestic tranquility. "I truly didn't anticipate your arrival today." Sarah, the woman David had encountered approximately 2 years following the tragic demise of his first wife in a devastating vehicular accident, was nearly a decade his junior. Their paths had initially crossed at a small, unassuming coffee establishment situated just beyond the perimeter of the military base. Their union, solemnized after a mere 8 months of courtship, had been precipitated in part by Imani's palpable need for a maternal figure within the household, and equally by David's earnest conviction that he was at last emotionally prepared to embark upon a new chapter. David offered a curt, almost imperceptible nod. "Early leave. Thought I'd make it a surprise." Sarah's smile, fleeting and devoid of genuine warmth, barely touched her lips. "Imani will be absolutely thrilled. Where might she be?" David carefully lowered his backpack near the entrance, his eyes sharp and practiced, sweeping rapidly across the expanse of the living area. There was no discernible evidence that a child had engaged in any form of play there that day. No tiny, brightly colored shoes carelessly discarded. No beloved stuffed animal draped affectionately over the armrest of the couch. Everything was unnervingly neat, an almost sterile stillness pervading the space. "She's gone to bed, bless her heart. Played so vigorously today, completely wore herself out," Sarah articulated, turning her back to him, her voice remarkably steady, almost unnaturally so. David offered no verbal retort. Instead, he initiated a slow, deliberate ascent of the staircase. He paused, his breath catching upon the landing. Imani's room was shrouded in a profound darkness, the door firmly closed, and from within, no sound, no whisper, no rustle dared to escape. Then with sudden and terrifying force, a piercing scream, raw with unadulterated fear, lacerated the oppressive silence. "Daddy!" Without the slightest hesitation, David lunged forward. His calloused hand instinctively clamped down upon the doorknob, but it remained stubbornly, ominously locked. He recoiled half a pace, bracing his sturdy frame, and then unleashed a forceful, military-precise kick. The door, splintering at its hinges, flew inward with an echoing crash, allowing the soft ambient light from the hallway to spill like a pale tide across the dimness of the room beyond. Inside, Imani was huddled a small trembling ball of fear in the farthest corner, her sweet face streaked with the glistening trails of fresh tears. Her nightgown was a crumpled, disheveled mess, and a faint, angry red mark stood out starkly upon her left cheek, fresh as if inflicted only moments ago. Sarah stood barely 2 short steps from the terror-stricken child, still clasping a small decorative pillow as though she had just an instant prior flung it onto the bed with considerable force. For a few agonizing seconds, all 3 of them remained utterly frozen, suspended in a suffocating silence. David moved forward, dropping to his knees beside Imani. She recoiled slightly, a subtle flinch when he extended his hand and gently touched her shoulder. She did not pull away completely, but neither did she lean into his touch. She simply sat there, her wide eyes staring blankly, unsettlingly past him. She was simply engaging in some vigorous play running around the room, and she unfortunately lost her footing, slipped, and then commenced to scream. I was at that very moment just about to attend to the situation, Sarah declared, her voice noticeably shaky, yet striving with a desperate effort to maintain an outward composure. David did not spare her a glance. He very gently, with immense care, pulled Imani closer to him, his fingers delicately checking the nape of her neck, where an older purplish bruise marred her tender skin. Her small, delicate hands were unnervingly ice-cold. He removed his combat jacket, its rough fabric a stark contrast to her soft skin, and carefully wrapped it around her, holding her close, a bulwark against the unseen storm. You specifically informed me that she had already entered the realm of slumber. David stated, his gaze still intently fixed upon Imani's pale face. Sarah's voice stiffened perceptibly. She was indeed in a state of sleep at that particular juncture. David carefully lifted Imani into his arms. She offered no response, her small arms hanging limply, her head resting heavily upon his shoulder, as if every last vestige of strength had utterly deserted her. A single crystalline tear slid silently down her cheek, a poignant testament to her silent suffering soaking into the fabric of David's collar. He made no move to wipe it away. He turned. Kevin and Aunt Carol, their faces etched with a mixture of curiosity and a strange cold detachment, stood at the very top of the stairs. Kevin inquired, his voice a disingenuous whisper. What on earth transpired? All I discerned was a piercing shriek. David offered no reply. He walked steadily, deliberately down the stairs, the precious weight of Imani cradled securely in his arms. He passed Sarah, who made a subtle, almost imperceptible movement to impede his path, but ultimately did not dare. In the living room, David retrieved the plush throw blanket from the couch and very gently draped it over his daughter. He carefully laid her down upon the long, inviting sofa, then turned back, confronting the 3 figures still frozen in their accusatory stances. What precisely is unfolding here? He demanded, his voice low, guttural, and imbued with the chilling authority of a seasoned military commander. No one uttered a single solitary word. David walked purposefully into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator door. There was no carton of Imani's specialized lactose-free milk, the specific kind she absolutely required due to her severe dairy intolerance. None of the familiar comforting foods she adored were present within its sterile confines. He surveyed the kitchen's impeccably organized surfaces. The small, cherished plastic cup, molded in the whimsical shape of a wise owl, his daughter's absolute favorite, was nowhere to be discerned. He returned to the couch. Imani remained precisely where he had left her, still lying motionless, her eyes open, her expression utterly silent. David sat down, leaning in close, his voice a gentle coaxing whisper. "Talk to me, my love." What precisely transpired? Imani pressed her lips together, forming a thin, defiant line, and then shook her head with a barely perceptible tremor. David closed his eyes for a fleeting, agonizing moment. When he reopened them, the very first words he articulated were not as one might expect a soft murmur of comfort. "From this moment forward, no one, absolutely no one, shall enter your room save for me. Do you comprehend the gravity of my words?" Imani offered a faint, almost imperceptible nod. Then her voice, a mere wisp of sound, she whispered, "Are you departing again?" David did not offer an immediate response. That poignant query, so sharp and unexpected, pierced through his chest with the agonizing precision of a freshly honed blade. "No," he stated with an unshakable firmness, his voice resonating with an undeniable conviction. "This time I am unequivocally staying. I will not permit anyone ever again to inflict harm upon you." And in that very moment, David possessed no conceivable means of knowing that the solemn promise he had just articulated, a father's most profound and final vow, would ironically serve as the very genesis of a pain so utterly cruel, so profoundly agonizing, that he could not possibly have conjured its depths even in his most abysmal and despair-laden thoughts. Imani had in due course succumbed to the gentle embrace of sleep upon the living room couch and had remained there throughout the entirety of the night, her head resting with an innocent weight against David's arm. Every now and then she stirred ever so slightly in her slumber, yet did not emit a single solitary sound. David, for his part, had not permitted himself even a moment of repose. He maintained his hand a constant, reassuring anchor upon her delicate shoulder, his eyes fixed with an unwavering vigilance upon her tiny, vulnerable face, where the angry red mark on her cheek had imperceptibly begun to fade into a considerably lighter, less conspicuous shade. When the sky commenced its gradual transformation, lightening with the subtle hues of approaching dawn, he very gently carried her upstairs, ascending the silent staircase without uttering a single word to anyone within the house. He activated the bedroom light, setting it to its very dimmest, most unobtrusive illumination, carefully tucked the blanket around her small form, then pulled a wooden chair close to the bedside and settled into it. Sliding his hand with exquisite tenderness beneath the edge of the blanket, he quietly, meticulously examined her joints, her tiny elbows, her calves, her wrists, the delicate base of her neck. Each movement executed with an almost surgical precision, ensuring not to disturb her peaceful slumber. Just below her left wrist, a bruise, a disconcerting greenish-purple transitioning into a sickly yellow around its indistinct edges, was undeniably present. Near the nape of her neck, intimately close to her hairline, there was a faint, almost perfectly round mark resembling an old scratch, or perhaps the distinct imprint of a fingernail. David's breathing hitched, ceasing altogether for a few agonizing seconds. He slowly, deliberately withdrew his hand, stood up, and walked quietly to the kitchen. When he discerned the very first faint clink of dishes from downstairs, Sarah was already fully dressed, her hair meticulously pinned up in a neat, almost severe bun, a spotless white apron tied impeccably around her slender waist. Kevin sat slouched at the kitchen table, clad in a faded gray hoodie, unceremoniously eating cereal with his feet propped up on the opposing chair. Aunt Carol, with an almost ritualistic grace, was in the process of pouring coffee. She cast a fleeting glance at David and offered a small, almost imperceptible smile, as if absolutely nothing out of the ordinary had transpired the preceding night. "Would you care for some coffee?" David darling Sarah inquired, continuing to arrange thin slices of artisan bread onto a polished plate with an unsettling normalcy. David shook his head slowly, his gaze unwavering, and leaned his imposing frame against the doorframe. "Is Imani still enjoying her slumber?" Kevin asked casually, his mouth half full of cereal, a disturbing lack of concern in his tone. "She is considerably fatigued," David replied, his eyes dark and unyielding, now locked onto Sarah's hands as she meticulously sliced the butter. "What precisely is the origin of that bruise upon her cheek?" Sarah paused for a microsecond, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face, then resumed her precise work, as if she had not in fact heard his direct inquiry. "She likely experienced a fall yesterday. You comprehend, darling, how perpetually she is running about." She delivered the words with an air of practiced detachment, as though recounting a trivial anecdote. "I have, as you recall, already apprised you of this." And the mark situated beneath her wrist, David pressed again, this time his voice lower, imbued with a steely resolve that belied its volume. Aunt Carol sipped her coffee silently, her expression inscrutable. "It's quite old, perhaps, from her academic institution. I truly cannot say," Sarah stated, finally turning to face him, her expression conspicuously neutral, even offering a small dismissive shrug. "Or perhaps from the period when our previous housekeeper was still in our employ prior to her sudden departure." The very next morning, David, adhering to his customary routine, drove Imani to her preschool. He articulated very little during the entire drive, the quiet tension in the vehicle palpable. Imani sat quietly, her gaze fixed intently upon the passing scenery outside the window, clutching tightly to the small, worn stuffed bear he had acquired for her on the momentous occasion of her 4th birthday. The bear, though now faded and somewhat threadbare, was held with an almost desperate tenacity, as if it represented the solitary tangible link to a world that still felt familiar and comforting. The preschool itself was nestled at the very termination of the street, a quaint red brick edifice with tendrils of moss, leisurely creeping along the base of its outer wall. The backyard, even at this hour, retained a damp sheen from the previous night's relentless rain. David gently guided Imani up the front steps, her small hand never once relinquishing its tenacious grip on the bear. Miss Anya, the teacher, stood patiently in the doorway, her attendance clipboard clutched firmly in her hands. Her composed expression faltered for a barely perceptible second when her eyes registered David's presence. "Good morning, Imani," she murmured gently, bending down to offer a warm greeting. Imani offered no verbal reply. She merely provided a small, almost imperceptible nod, her eyes assiduously avoiding the gazes of everyone else present. David placed his large, reassuring hand upon his daughter's small shoulder, leaned down, and spoke softly to the little girl. "Go on inside, sweetheart. Your daddy simply needs to have a brief word with Miss Anya, and then I shall return promptly to retrieve you." Imani offered another faint, hesitant nod, and quietly, almost imperceptibly, walked into the classroom. When the door swung shut silently behind her, David maintained his unwavering gaze upon Miss Anya's face. "Miss Anya," he began, his tone conspicuously, even deliberately devoid of accusation, "while I was away on my deployment, did you by any chance observe anything different about Imani? Any subtle shifts in her customary behavior, or perhaps in the manner in which she customarily interacts with her peers?" Miss Anya appeared to experience a slight unease, and she adjusted her spectacles with a nervous gesture. "Well," she began, her voice tinged with a delicate hesitancy, "she has undeniably been much quieter than her usual disposition. She tends to sequester herself, preferring to sit in solitude. She engages in drawing quite extensively, but she exhibits a distinct reluctance to share the subject matter of her artistic creations. Furthermore, she smiles considerably less frequently. Less smiling. Drawing alone. Do you, Miss Anya, harbor the belief that there is anything that might be instilling fear within her?" David inquired, his gaze steady and unblinking, probing the depths of her observation. Miss Anya's eyes darted momentarily toward the classroom through the large window, then returned to meet his gaze. "I do indeed perceive that something is not entirely as it should be, but I find myself quite unable to pinpoint the exact nature of the anomaly," she confessed. "She does not react with much intensity when the other children playfully tease her or inadvertently bump into her, as has been the case lately. She also startles rather easily at unexpected loud noises. Have you at any point observed any discernible bruises or any other unusual marks upon her delicate body?" Miss Anya, David inquired, lowering his voice, which now possessed a sharper, more intensely focused edge. Miss Anya paused, a noticeable hesitation in her demeanor. "Yes, I did indeed observe a small faint scrape on her wrist on one occasion, and a reddish mark quite distinct on the back of her neck. I did, of course, inquire about these occurrences, but Miss Sarah asserted that Imani is by nature quite clumsy, perpetually tripping over chairs and desks. And you, Miss Anya, genuinely found that explanation credible." David interjected, his voice cutting in for the first time since their conversation had commenced, his patience visibly wearing thin. Miss Anya met his unwavering gaze for 1 second, then 2. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. "I truly do not know. I regret to inform you that I do not possess the requisite authority to intervene in delicate family matters." David nodded slowly, his expression utterly unreadable, a mask of controlled contemplation. He retrieved his wallet from his pocket, extracted a business card, flipped it over, and with a deliberate motion inscribed a series of numbers in indelible ink. "If anything else should manifest itself, Miss Anya, anything at all, please do not hesitate to contact me immediately." He slipped the card into her hand, his touch firm but gentle. Without awaiting any form of response, he turned and strode purposefully away, descending the steps with a resolute stride, his hands tucked deeply into his coat pockets, his chin tucked low against the persistent, chilly wind. That afternoon, during the quiet drive home, he made an unscheduled stop at a quaint park and purchased 2 generous ice cream cones. The brisk, cool air prevented them from melting too swiftly, but Imani heartbreakingly did not partake in hers. She simply stared at it with a vacant, distant expression. "Fatigued, honey?" he inquired, not truly anticipating a verbal response. "No," Imani murmured softly. David looked intently into her eyes, then very gently, he inquired, "Did your stepmother Sarah inflict any harm upon you?" Imani hesitated, a flicker of internal conflict crossing her small face. Then she shook her head only to follow it with a faint, almost imperceptible nod. David did not press her further. He simply sat quietly, patiently. After a considerable period of silence, Imani looked down at her small hands and articulated softly, her voice barely audible, "My stepmom, Sarah, does not hold me in affection, but Aunt Carol stated that if I were to inform you, you would inevitably depart and never, ever return." David turned his entire body toward her, his gaze unwavering and steady. "Who, my darling, conveyed that information to you? Aunt Carol did," Imani confirmed, her voice gaining a fractional measure of strength. "And my stepmom Sarah as well." Imani finally looked up at him directly into his eyes for the very first time that day. "I am terribly afraid that if I articulate the truth, you will simply vanish." David exhaled slowly, a profound, weary sigh escaping his lips. He carefully placed his uneaten ice cream down upon the park bench. He extended his arms and very gently pulled her into a comforting embrace. Imani did not reciprocate the hug, but neither did she pull away, her small body remaining still within his grasp. "Listen to me, my precious one," he whispered, his voice low and fervent, close to her ear. "No matter what unforeseen circumstances may unfold, no matter what words anyone may utter, I am not under any conceivable circumstances going anywhere. Even if you should become angry with me, even if you should decide you no longer wish to engage in conversation with me, I shall still without fail be right here steadfastly by your side." Imani offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, so minuscule that it conveyed the profound sense that she was still, even in that moment of solace, holding back, even from the fledgling hope that David's words offered. David that very morning made the immediate and unwavering decision to cancel his scheduled return to his military unit. He dispatched an urgent email formally requesting a 7-day leave of absence, deliberately omitting any specific justification for his sudden request. He desperately required this time at home. He needed with an acute urgency to observe for himself, to discern with his own eyes precisely what was transpiring within his household, not relying solely upon his gut instinct, but upon the undeniable, irrefutable truth. He communicated very little to Sarah, simply employing the convenient excuse of a persistent headache and an overwhelming need for restorative rest. He then convincingly feigned a state of profound exhaustion and ascended the stairs ostensibly to lie in bed throughout the entire duration of lunch. The bedroom door, however, he meticulously left slightly ajar, and the curtains, though drawn, provided only a superficial veil for his intent. His ears, far from resting, remained acutely attuned to every subtle sound, every faint footstep upon the wooden floorboards, the soft, distant roll of a suitcase being maneuvered down the hall, the delicate clinking of spoons and forks from the kitchen below. Around 11:30 a.m., he distinctly heard Imani's soft slippers shuffle to a hesitant halt near the kitchen doorway. Then Sarah's voice, low and deliberately controlled, yet sufficiently clear for him to discern every chilling word, drifted upward, soiling the floor again. "Are we? Just precisely how far are you attempting to push me, child?" There was no immediate reply, merely a few agonizing seconds of drawn-out silence. Then Sarah's voice resurfaced, sharper this time, almost a guttural snarl. "You are indeed extraordinarily fortunate that you still possess the privilege to partake in meals, to possess garments, to reside within the confines of this very house. Your biological mother's demise was without a shadow of a doubt the most propitious event that ever transpired." David's eyes snapped open, his heart delivering a single violent thump against his ribs. He did not, however, rush immediately downstairs. Instead, he carefully sat upright, stepped quietly to the door, and meticulously cracked it open, just a few inches, precisely enough to enhance his auditory perception. Imani's reply was barely a whisper, so faint, so delicate, that it could only be discerned in the profoundest of silences. I am sorry. I have already cleaned it truly." "Shut up. You call this cleaning when there remains a puddle such as this?" Sarah's voice was as cold and unyielding as polished stone. "If your grandmother Aunt Carol were to witness this, you would most certainly regret it. Go immediately procure a cleaning rag. Get down on your knees and clean this mess." There was no sound of small running footsteps, merely the soft, almost imperceptible click of a cabinet door opening, then the quiet rustling sound of a towel being carefully pulled out. Less than a minute later, another voice, distinctly male, joined the chilling tableau. "Hey, Imani, my little monster under the bed is quite famished. If anyone dares to disobey, it will without hesitation drag you down and viciously bite your legs off. Got that, kid?" Imani's voice, a mere tremor, caught in her throat, then dropped to an almost inaudible whisper. "Please, please don't." What I was merely jesting, Kevin scoffed, his tone sharp and dismissive, his eyes betraying not even the slightest trace of remorse. "You're truly scared. I had rather presumed you would have grown accustomed to such pronouncements by now." David had already risen from his bed, his movements fluid and silent before Kevin had even uttered his first cruel word. He descended the staircase without the slightest sound, one hand gripping the sturdy wooden railing so intensely that the knuckles beneath his dark skin turned a stark, alarming white. He stopped a silent, imposing figure directly in front of Imani's door. The very last sound that echoed in the oppressive quiet was the dull thud of something hard. Plastic, perhaps, or a broom handle, falling and hitting the floor. "Dad's home," he stated, his voice not loud but clear and sharp, possessing the undeniable authority of a direct military command. Silence descended upon the house like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Kevin shot to his feet, his movements jerky and panicked, hurrying toward the doorway, stammering incoherent excuses. "Oh, you're awake. I was merely supervising the girl for Sarah. She accidentally spilled some water, so I simply instructed her to clean it up. I was just, messing around, genuinely didn't imagine she'd freeze up like that." David blocked the doorway, an unmoving, impenetrable barrier. He fixed his gaze upon Kevin for precisely 2 seconds, his expression utterly unreadable, then stepped past him without uttering a single word and walked straight into the room. Imani was huddled forlornly in the corner, a filthy soaking rag clutched tightly in her small hands. She was still clad in her old disheveled pajamas, her hair a tangled mess, her eyes downcast, devoid of their usual light. A thin, glistening film of soapy water coated the floor with dried suds crusting visibly along the grout lines. David knelt down, his movements slow and deliberate, and very gently took her hand. The delicate skin was red, not visibly cut, but rough in distinct patches, bearing marks not from abrasive heat, but from prolonged repetitive scrubbing under an excessive punishing pressure. Sarah stepped into the room, her eyes tight with a feigned concern, yet her lips curved into an annoyingly complacent smile. "What, pray tell, is transpiring here? I was entirely unaware that Kevin was up here. I was, as you know, in the kitchen. He must have witnessed her spill the water and entered to tease her. You know, darling, how Kevin is always running his mouth. The girl is simply overly sensitive, that is all." David offered no immediate response. He carefully, almost reverently, withdrew the rag from Imani's hand, as though fearing he might inflict further harm upon her fragile spirit. She offered no reaction, her gaze remaining stubbornly low. No flinch. No retreat. Nothing. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" he inquired, his voice hoarse with suppressed emotion. Imani nodded. It was a slow, mechanical nod, more akin to something meticulously memorized than something genuinely felt. David clenched his fists in his lap, the tendons in his hands tightening visibly. He stood up, his eyes, locking onto Sarah's, filled with an unwavering resolve. "Get out, both of you." Sarah hesitated for a single pregnant beat, as if meticulously calculating her optimal reaction. In the end, she merely offered a dismissive shrug. "All right, darling, but you should endeavor to remember us." Kevin rolled his shoulders, a mocking grin twisting his lips. "Don't worry about it. Kids these days, every single one of them is a scaredy cat." David offered no response. He simply waited for the two of them to exit the room, then quietly, deliberately closed the door behind them. He sat down, not directly beside Imani, but at an angle across from her, leaving just enough space so that she would not feel further cornered or entrapped. In the profound silence, his eyes wandered slowly around the room. It was small, painted a soft, comforting rose hue, once Imani's own cherished little world, but now the walls were starkly bare. No pictures, no vibrant drawings, nothing resembling the joyful clutter of before. At the foot of the bed, her old, worn stuffed animal lay crookedly, forlornly. He bent down and picked it up. The belly had a small raw tear with a few square, meticulously folded pieces of paper tucked securely inside. David unfolded one. The first was a rough, almost childlike crayon drawing of a house with 3 distinct figures: a tall, imposing man, a small, delicate child, and a faceless, featureless woman. The second was scrawled in pencil, shaky and uneven, "Don't tell." David did not utter a single word. He carefully slipped the precious papers into his shirt pocket. When he turned back, Imani was still in the exact same spot, had not moved an inch. He sat beside her, not touching, but close. "If there is anywhere, my darling, anywhere at all, that you desire to go, you merely have to tell me." Imani turned her head slowly, her eyes no longer carrying the vibrant, unburdened light a 5-year-old should possess. She offered no verbal reply, but for the very first time she shifted just a fraction, a mere few inches closer to him. It was just enough for David to discern that somewhere, deep within the shadows of her young mind, there remained still a fragile pathway out. David departed the house before the first rays of the sun had managed to pierce through the persistent morning mist. He informed Sarah that he had something critically important to attend to, offering no further explanation, no specific details. She nodded, almost, it seemed, with a palpable sense of relief. Imani was still asleep, or at the very least, lay motionless beneath the thick, comforting blanket. His very first stop was the residence of Miss Evelyn, the elderly neighbor who lived just beyond the sturdy back wall of his property. She opened the door after discreetly peeking through the curtain, appearing genuinely surprised to discover David standing patiently in her yard. "Oh, David, it has been a considerable period of time indeed. Miss Evelyn, I possess a few inquiries, and I earnestly hope that you will extend the courtesy of honesty," he stated directly without preamble. Miss Evelyn, though visibly hesitant, invited him into her quaint sitting room and with trembling hands poured some chamomile tea. When David with immense care asked about Imani, her hesitation became even more pronounced. "Every single night, David, I hear crying. It's soft, more akin to a faint whimper. Sometimes it sounds precisely like someone calling out for their mother, but I merely presumed perhaps she was sleepwalking. Children, do they not frequently experience unsettling nightmares? Have you at any point ever heard Sarah raise her voice in anger? Yes, David, but not with consistent regularity. She possesses a discernible temper, to be sure, but she invariably presents herself as entirely pleasant, and smiles profusely in public. One would never ever suspect her true disposition." She stopped, carefully setting her trembling hand upon the teacup. "I used to harbor suspicions, David, I truly did. But I was, I must confess, rather afraid. Aunt Carol, she is the individual who is deeply involved and highly respected within the community, and she is acquainted with the former sheriff. I am merely a retired, solitary old woman. What precisely could I possibly have accomplished?" David expressed his profound gratitude and prepared to depart. Miss Evelyn, with a surprising strength, grasped his hand and whispered softly, "If you should find yourself in need of someone to articulate the truth, I am uncertain if I can formally swear to anything, but I will not, David. I swear remain silent any longer." His very last destination was the private clinic where Imani had been seen on a few occasions over the past year. Dr. Chen was meticulously reviewing patient files when David arrived. He welcomed him in with a polite, almost deferential expression, carefully conspicuously avoiding direct eye contact. David proceeded straight to the heart of the matter. "Dr. Chen, have you at any point observed anything distinctly unusual on Imani?" Dr. Chen cleared his throat. A nervous gesture turned to his computer screen and meticulously pulled up Imani's medical records. "She has been noted as rather sensitive, a few instances of mild sore throats, one case of minor skin irritation, but nothing of a serious nature. No diagnosis, Sergeant Vance, that would in any manner suggest abuse. Nothing at all." "Or nothing, Dr. Chen, that you dared to formally record?" David inquired, his voice lowering, perceptibly imbued with a quiet menace. Dr. Chen looked up finally, meeting David's unwavering eyes. "Sergeant Vance, I shall be unequivocally honest. Sarah is to an extraordinary degree in complete control. Every single time she brought the girl in, she meticulously described the symptoms before I could even formulate a question. She invariably spoke for Imani, presenting herself as the epitome of the ideal mother, confident, thoroughly informed. I do not, Sergeant Vance, possess the authority to interrogate a parent within the confines of my medical practice." David clenched his fist, then with a visible effort relaxed his grip. His voice was quieter now, a dangerous calm settling over it. "You are a doctor, Dr. Chen. You do unequivocally possess the right to ask questions." Dr. Chen offered no response. That afternoon, David returned home. He pulled into the driveway and sat behind the steering wheel, utterly unmoving, his mind tangled with far too many disparate threads. Miss Anya's unsettling words, Miss Evelyn's evasive glances, Dr. Chen's carefully cultivated silence. Every single one of them knew each, and every one of them possessed a piece of the unsettling puzzle, but no one had dared to act. He unlocked his phone, intending to meticulously review his hastily scribbled notes once more when he noticed an unread email. The sender was anonymous, simply a cryptic line that read, "For the real father." The message itself was brief, chilling in its conciseness. "If you are truly his father, inquire of Imani concerning the corner of the closet where she habitually seeks refuge every night." David read it 3 times, each repetition driving the chilling words deeper into his soul. There was no signature, no attachment, yet every single word felt like a sharpened blade driven straight into the very core of his heart. He turned off the phone, stepped out of the car, and headed straight to Imani's room. She was engrossed in coloring and did not even look up when he quietly entered. "Imani," he murmured gently, sitting down beside the bed. "Daddy wishes to inquire about something. The corner of your closet. Is there perhaps something particularly special about it?" Imani looked up, her eyes widening perceptibly, the pupils quivering just a little. She did not speak, but for the very first time, that small, innocent face displayed a flicker of profound, unadulterated panic. At precisely 12:30 that morning, all the neighboring lights were extinguished. Aunt Carol had meticulously locked up early. Kevin had retired to his room at 9:00 p.m., taking his game console and headphones with him. Sarah had declared her intention to remain awake to watch television, but the living room lights had been off since precisely 11 o'clock. David had driven out exactly at midnight, meticulously ensuring that everyone within the house was unequivocally convinced he had something critically urgent to attend to. He circled the neighborhood then with a practiced grace, cut his headlights, eased back onto the street, and parked his vehicle at the far end of the alley, locking the car manually under the faint, diffused glow of a distant street lamp. He pulled a baseball cap low over his forehead, zipped his jacket up to his neck, and made his way quietly around to the back of the house. He climbed over the sturdy wooden fence, the very one he had meticulously fixed himself just the preceding year. The back door was as anticipated locked, but the ground floor window to the storage room still presented a viable ingress. He knew precisely how to unlatch it from the outside, a simple procedure requiring just a small blade and a gentle, precise twist, and the window swung open with a soft sigh. David slipped inside without uttering a sound, his feet touching the floor as lightly as a whispered breath. The house was enveloped in a profound inky darkness. He did not under any circumstances activate any lights, relying solely upon his ingrained memory to guide him unerringly upstairs. Every single stair was intimately familiar. He knew precisely which ones creaked under the slightest pressure and which ones remained steadfastly silent. 10 steps, then a decisive left turn. Imani's room was positioned on the right. The door was left slightly ajar. David stopped, his senses acutely attuned, and listened intently. No crying, no discernible voices. Just one solitary sound, quiet and strained, like someone desperately attempting to stifle a pained breath. A faint, almost imperceptible whimper from within. He pushed the door open, still maintaining the profound absence of light within the room. Only the soft ambient glow from the hallway stretched across a portion of the polished wooden floor. Imani was not on the bed. David stepped inside, then paused, alerted by a soft, almost imperceptible noise from under the desk chair, a subtle rustle, like fabric brushing against wood. He moved toward it, bent down. Imani was sitting there, her small back pressed firmly against the wall, her arms wrapped tightly around a worn-out stuffed animal, its fur matted from countless embraces. Her head hung low, a picture of profound dejection. The toy bear's belly had been slit open, the seam still unstitched, a silent testament to a recent desperate act. Her eyes were wide, catching the dim light, but remarkably dry, devoid of tears. David turned his entire body toward her, settling close, his large hand resting gently on her small back. He kept his voice slow and steady, every word meticulously clear. "No, Imani, never. No matter what unforeseen circumstances may unfold, I will never ever be angry with you. I am right here, steadfastly beside you." Imani leaned in, pressing her head against his shoulder. She did not cry, but she trembled ever so slightly, her small hands clutching his coat as if she harbored a deep-seated fear that he would at any given moment simply vanish if she dared to relinquish her hold. David remained in that position for a long, immeasurable period of time. His heartbeat gradually slowed, but deep within his chest, the internal storm had not yet abated. He knew with an unshakable certainty that this very moment, when Imani leaned in to be close to him, when she chose at last to speak, instead of remaining cloaked in silence, was a profound sign. The final most crucial door had at last been unbarred. He sat there beside her, one arm wrapped reassuringly around her fragile shoulders. With the other, he carefully extracted his phone from his pocket. He activated the recording function, not specifically to capture her precious words, for she had uttered very little, but to preserve the profound silence itself, a silence that was in that moment speaking louder than anything else imaginable. After he had gently helped Imani back into bed and carefully tucked the blanket around her small form, he left the room, closing the door gently behind him, and then made a call. "I need you, Marcus," he articulated as soon as the line connected. "Middle of the night. I cannot under any circumstances wait. I possess compelling reasons to suspect child abuse. I require specialized gear and potentially a surveillance warrant should this investigation necessitate further action." The voice on the other end of the line dropped low, laced with a familiar gravity. "It has been a considerable period of time, David, since I have heard you sound this gravely serious. This time, Marcus, it's unequivocally real. It's my own child," David responded, his voice raw with emotion. David stepped out to the backyard, pulled out a pack of cigarettes, and with a practiced motion, lit one. He did not smoke it. He simply held it between his fingers while it slowly burned, the thin column of smoke, drifting idly in the wind, as ephemeral as a forgotten strand of memory. The torn photo of Elena Imani's birth mother was still tucked securely in his jacket pocket. On the floor inside, 3 adhesive bandages were meticulously sealed in a plastic bag, destined for evidence. He knew with an unshakable certainty that he could not, under any circumstances, turn back now. Not out of anger, but out of a profound and unwavering devotion to his 5-year-old daughter, the innocent child who had through unimaginable hardship learned to seek solace and a semblance of safety by sitting in a dark, confined closet. The next morning, David drove to the old, unassuming phone repair shop near the bustling bus station where Detective Miller had arranged to meet him. There was no conspicuous sign, no visible security cameras. The metal shutter was rolled halfway up, revealing a dim yellow light emanating from within and the soft, monotonous hum of an old, struggling fan. Detective Miller was already waiting, his sleeves meticulously rolled his face, as unreadable as when he was deep undercover. "Got something for you, Sergeant Vance," Detective Miller stated, laying 3 small, innocuous items upon the table: a charging plug with a concealed microphone, a button-sized camera, and a minuscule recording chip meticulously embedded inside the head of a plush teddy bear. "This particular item is specifically for Imani." He added a dry, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips as he pointed to the bear. "When she embraces it, it meticulously records everything in its immediate vicinity. The battery recharges automatically through a body heat sensor." David nodded, offering no further inquiries. He carefully packed each item into a shock-proof pouch, then exited through the back door. That afternoon, when Sarah brought Imani home from school, David was out front, ostensibly engaged in the task of changing the porch light. Kevin sat in the living room, oversized headphones clamped over his ears, his eyes immovably locked onto his phone screen. No one paid the slightest attention as David slipped into Imani's room, ostensibly to inspect a broken outlet. He plugged the charger into the corner socket, checked the signal on his phone application, then placed the teddy bear neatly beside her pillow. The entire operation consumed less than 8 minutes. The evening passed with an eerie, almost unsettling calm. Sarah, with a forced cheerfulness, joked around in the kitchen, meticulously preparing spaghetti, a dish David had always expressed a fondness for. Kevin, with a noticeable dragging of his feet, reluctantly performed the dishes, and Imani sat quietly at the dinner table, so exceptionally well behaved that it felt almost fundamentally wrong. David did not utter much, but his eyes remained constantly fixed upon the clock, waiting with a profound sense of anticipation for midnight to arrive. At precisely 2:00 a.m., the room was shrouded in complete darkness, illuminated only by the faint, ethereal glow of David's phone screen. The very first audio file had just finished downloading. He plugged in his headphones and pressed play. The initial sound was the distinct thump of footsteps, then a soft, almost inaudible whimper from Imani. Sarah's voice then came through sharp and crystal clear, piercing the silence. "Spilled the water again, huh? How many damn times do I have to explicitly tell you utterly useless? Just like the whore who gave birth to you." Then came a distinct smack, unnervingly clear, though it was impossible to ascertain if it was a dish or something considerably harder impacting a surface. Imani did not cry. She did not beg. Only the sound of her own breathing, broken and trembling, could be discerned. Then Kevin's voice came through his words, chillingly interwoven with the distinct sound of a door creaking open. "This is our little secret, remember. Anyone who tells will, without a doubt, get dragged away by the monster." Imani offered no answer, no sound at all. A long, suffocating silence followed. Then came the slow, dry click of the door closing with an air of finality. David pulled off his headphones and shot upright in bed, his heart pounding like a relentless hammer against his ribs. He turned on the small bedside lamp plugged in his phone and opened the monitoring application. The camera had meticulously captured Imani's room at night, from the corner near her headboard, not sufficiently clear to discern distinct faces, but enough to accurately mark the precise timing of events. He called Detective Miller. "I need you to hear this, Marcus. I cannot under any circumstances wait." On the other end, he heard the faint sound of coffee being poured. Detective Miller listened intently to the first part of the recording. He did not utter anything for a few seconds. Then his voice came low and firm, imbued with a professional gravity. "It is enough, David, to commence proceedings, but not unfortunately enough to secure a conviction. Sarah will undoubtedly assert that he is merely disciplining a stepchild. Kevin will simply laugh it off as playfully teasing a young child. You are, David, intimately familiar with the intricate nuances of this particular game." David pressed his fingers to his forehead, a gesture of profound weariness. "So, Marcus, what course of action do I precisely pursue? Wait until—" "No, David," Detective Miller interjected his voice, cutting off David's query with an abrupt certainty. "You must exercise patience and precision. If you were to make a move now, they would, without a shadow of a doubt, disappear and take Imani with them. I have witnessed such scenarios unfold countless times before." Silence descended once more. David sat down, his hand clenched tightly into a fist. "So, Marcus, what, pray tell, is the next crucial step? I will meticulously clean and securely store the evidence, David. You, for your part, must act as if absolutely nothing has transpired. Smile, partake in dinner, express your gratitude, and continue recording." The very next day, David engaged in dinner with the entire family. He recounted an old humorous anecdote from his army days, a story that elicited genuine laughter from Kevin. Sarah, too, played along with the charade, even refilling his wine glass with an unsettling attentiveness. Imani sat quietly beside him, her small presence a testament to her enduring resilience. But she glanced at her father, her gaze not one of desperate plea for immediate rescue, but rather a look of profound quiet waiting. That very night, Imani began to talk in her sleep. David was engrossed in reading the newspaper in his room when he distinctly heard her whimpering. He opened the door and gently stepped in, whispering softly, "Daddy's here, my love." Imani turned over, still deeply immersed in her slumber, her voice trembling faintly in the depths of a nightmare. "Mr. Kevin turned off the light, wouldn't let me breathe. I was so scared. I didn't dare scream." David clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white once more. He did not wake his daughter, but in his mind a decision had just formed, sharp and undeniable, like an internal alarm bell blaring with an ominous clarity. The very next morning, David, with meticulous precision, installed a small, discreet camera underneath the dining table. Another was ingeniously concealed inside a fountain pen he habitually carried with him. Every single time Kevin stepped into Imani's room, David meticulously noted the precise time. Whenever Sarah's voice escalated into a yell, he meticulously recorded her tone, her attitude, and the chilling inflection of her words. And every single night, without fail, he transmitted the collected data to Detective Miller, encrypted and securely stored on 2 separate hard drives, one of which resided safely within a bank vault, registered solely under Detective Miller's name. Imani did not know. Sarah did not know. Kevin did not know. David had imperceptibly transformed into a man with 2 distinct faces, a quiet, seemingly unassuming father, and a silent, vigilant sentinel, meticulously observing every shadow, every fleeting gesture. When David sat alone in his car past midnight listening intently to the third recording, the one where Imani only breathed softly, her tiny breaths ragged with fear, as Kevin menacingly mentioned the monster under the bed, He knew with an unshakable certainty that he was rapidly approaching his absolute limit, not because he lacked sufficient evidence, but because every single second he patiently waited was yet another agonizing day. Imani was compelled to endure a profound, nameless fear, a terror she, in her tender innocence, did not yet possess the words to articulate. That afternoon, David drove Imani to Grandma Evelyn's house, utilizing the plausible excuse that her daddy's got to take care of something out of state for a few days. Grandma Evelyn did not pose many questions. She simply looked deeply into his eyes, offered a small, knowing nod, then gently reached for Imani's small hand. The little girl stepped inside without casting a single glance backward, as if she already possessed an innate understanding that something profound was shifting in her world. As the car pulled away from the gate, David did not roll down the window. He needed to remain intensely focused. Last night, in a recording, Kevin had whispered a chilling threat to Imani. "Grandma will make you stay quiet if you talk." David knew with a terrifying clarity that the time had come to confront the very source from which all this suffering had originated. The very first person David went to see was Annie, an old trusted buddy from his rigorous military days, now employed in the crucial field of social services. She readily agreed to meet him at a discreet cafe situated near the staff housing complex. Sarah Montgomery David began handing her a slip of paper bearing a name and a specific date of birth. Used to reside in Arizona prior to 2007. Do you by any chance possess a file on her? Annie glanced at the paper, then sat perfectly still for a few thoughtful seconds. That name, she murmured, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. It certainly rings a bell. Grant me 2 hours, David. Just 2 hours. 2 hours later, Annie transmitted a secure email to David, an excerpt from a sealed case file meticulously detailing the history of a young girl named Sarah who had endured severe emotional and physical abuse at the hands of her biological mother. The file included a clinical diagnosis, severe depression with discernible signs of borderline personality disorder. She had dropped out of school on 2 separate occasions. Once, tragically, she had slashed her wrist at the tender age of 15. The biological mother, a woman named Carol Jenkins, had been formally flagged for numerous child welfare violations, but had infuriatingly never been prosecuted due to an insurmountable lack of conclusive evidence. David read each line meticulously, agonizingly in his car. His hand began to tremble, and not from fear, but from something else entirely, something profound within his own simmering hatred that had just imperceptibly cracked open. The next individual David sought out was Clarissa, a former high school classmate of Sarah's, now employed at a quiet library in the adjacent town. Clarissa was not surprisingly startled to see him. She invited him to sit down, then quietly, almost reverently poured a glass of water. I used to earnestly wish, David, that anyone would come and inquire of me about Sarah. Clarissa recalled her voice soft with a lingering sadness. Back in our 11th grade, Sarah became pregnant. The father was a college freshman. He quite literally vanished the very moment he discovered her condition. Sarah's mother, Aunt Carol, forcefully compelled her to drop out of school and subsequently confined her within the house for nearly 2 unbearable months. When Sarah was finally taken to the hospital, her mother, Aunt Carol, shamefully coerced her into undergoing an abortion, signing the consent forms herself because Sarah was still legally under 18 years of age. After that harrowing experience, Sarah was never truly the same. She became distant, cold, devoid of her former warmth. No more friends, no more genuine smiles. I was just a child myself then, David Clarissa confessed, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. There was truly nothing I could possibly have done. But ever since I became aware that she had become a stepmom, I have been consumed with an unrelenting worry. David did not return home. He drove straight to Dr. Chen's office this time without the formality of an appointment. Dr. Chen was in the process of tidying up some papers when he observed David's imposing presence. He let out a weary sigh, a sound heavy with resignation. I rather anticipated Sergeant Vance that this day would inevitably arrive. David set his phone down on the desk, its presence a silent, undeniable accusation. I desire the absolute truth, Dr. Chen, nothing less. Dr. Chen did not attempt to dodge the inevitable. He removed his glasses and with a gesture of profound fatigue rubbed his forehead. The very first time I meticulously examined Imani Sergeant Vance, I harbored my own distinct suspicions. But Sarah, she knew that I had been previously suspended once for a false report in an old controversial case. She explicitly told me that if I were to fabricate anything again, she would without hesitation sue me for harassment and defamation. I knew Sergeant Vance that just one article, just one public accusation, and I would irretrievably lose my medical license for good. David clenched his fists, but he maintained his voice low-controlled. Do you, Dr. Chen, regret it? Every single day, Sergeant Vance, Dr. Chen replied, his voice thick with genuine remorse. And I am unequivocally willing to testify should you require my assistance. David stood outside the house. The sky was overcast, a uniform gray, and the wind blew softly, chillingly. He did not go in immediately. He waited until the living room light switched off, until Kevin stepped into the bathroom, until the house had gone completely unnervingly still. Then he rang the doorbell 3 firm, decisive presses. Aunt Carol answered the light from inside, spilling across her aged but steely face. She did not appear surprised in the least. "You're late, David." David met her unyielding eyes. "We need to converse about Sarah, about Imani." She stepped back without explicitly inviting him in. David walked in on his own accord and quietly, firmly closed the door behind him. They sat across from each other in the living room, the only illumination emanating from a dim table lamp. Aunt Carol sipped her tea, unhurried and remarkably unshaken. "You genuinely believe, David, that I am the fundamental reason for all of this?" David offered no reply. "Sarah has always been inherently fragile, David, ever since she was a very young child. She never truly learned to be strong. I raised her in that manner because the world as I perceive it does not make adequate room for the weak. By forcing her to undergo that abortion, by systematically beating her down so relentlessly and profoundly, she ultimately came to harbor a deep, pervasive hatred for any other child who served as a painful reminder of her own lost unborn child." Aunt Carol set the glass down, the sound of it hitting the table sharp and cold like the sudden cracking of ice. Tuesday dawned under an overcast sky, a thick blanket of dark foreboding clouds covering the horizon like a somber curtain before a grand tragic performance. David skipped breakfast. He only consumed water, waiting with an almost unbearable patience until precisely 8:00 a.m., the exact time he had meticulously arranged the night before with Detective Miller and the Child Protective Services officer. The front door opened like it did every single day. Kevin was sprawled out on the sofa, one leg draped carelessly over the armrest, a game controller clutched loosely in his hand. Sarah was in the kitchen, meticulously slicing apples for Imani's breakfast. The little girl sat in a high chair, her back stiff and unnaturally straight, as if already undergoing a form of silent punishment. 3 distinct knocks measured punctual, imbued with an undeniable authority. Sarah looked up, a slight frown forming imperceptibly on her brow. Kevin groaned lazily, reluctantly pushing himself up to answer the door. What he saw froze him in place, his casual demeanor instantly replaced by utter terror. 2 police officers in full official uniform stood beside a woman wearing a vest clearly marked with the Child Protective Services logo. Detective Miller stood behind them, not in uniform, merely wearing his badge on a lanyard. "Good morning," Detective Miller stated calmly. "We possess an emergency child welfare check order under Statute 42(6). Everyone within this household is legally required to cooperate immediately." Sarah stepped out of the kitchen, her mouth barely forming words. "What?" There must be a profound mistake. The social worker, a woman of calm authority, produced the official order, her voice firm and resolute. "We have received a comprehensive report, including compelling audio and video evidence of both emotional and physical abuse involving a minor residing at this particular address." Kevin backed away slowly, his face paling. I don't know anything. I'm merely staying here for a brief period." One of the officers stepped forward, handcuffs held conspicuously ready. Kevin bolted, attempted to make a desperate dash for the back door, but he did not get far. He was taken down swiftly and decisively before he could even reach it. Sarah screamed a raw, primal sound of disbelief and fury. "You're insane. That's my child. This is all lies. All made up." David stood outside silent, a stoic observer. He did not interfere, but his eyes never once left Imani, who was clutching her worn-out teddy bear tightly. Her small hands, trembling uncontrolled, to the social worker approached her gently. "Imani, sweetheart, you're coming with me. Everything is going to be absolutely fine now. No one is going to hurt you anymore, my love." Imani looked up at David for the very first time, her eyes seeming to truly connect with something real, something profoundly trustworthy. David stepped forward, offering a small, reassuring nod. He knelt down, his voice low and steady. "You are safe now, my darling. I promise you." Imani remained silent, but her small hand clutched his shirt tightly, a desperate grip. Then she leaned her head on his shoulder. She did not cry. She did not scream. It was just a gentle lean, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it was the very first time she had truly leaned on him since his return. Detective Miller turned away. The social worker raised a hand to wipe the corner of her eye. None of the remaining officers uttered another word. Sarah was held within the house for a preliminary interview. David did not enter, but once everyone else had departed, he was permitted into the living room where she sat, her hands trembling uncontrollably, though her eyes remained dry, devoid of tears. "Are you enacting all of this because you profoundly hate me?" Sarah inquired, her voice hoarse, broken. David did not offer an immediate answer. He sat across from her, his arms folded, then calmly, slowly, he articulated, "No, Sarah. I perform these actions for Imani, but I do not in my heart harbor hatred for you." Sarah looked at him, her gaze empty, desolate. I did not intend to. I didn't know how. I didn't know how to truly be a mother." David offered a small, understanding nod, then he stood up, preparing to depart. Just before stepping through the door, he paused, looked straight at her, not with anger, not with pity, just with the eyes of someone who had once profoundly believed. "I know, Sarah. I know you were deeply hurt. I know you were a child no one adequately protected, but that Sarah is not a legitimate reason to force another innocent child to live through the very same harrowing experiences." Sarah said nothing, her silence a stark confession. David lowered his head, exhaling slowly, a profound weariness emanating from him. "But I still sincerely hope that you find a way to save yourself, Sarah, if there still exists a chance." As the car pulled away from the alley, the first faint light of dawn began to rise on the horizon. Imani had fallen asleep on James's shoulder, still clutching her teddy bear. Her forehead rested against his neck, her breathing steady and light. No more flinching. No more fear. Detective Miller sat in the front seat, watching the rear-view mirror. "You can, David, finally rest now." David did not respond. His arms were wrapped securely around Imani, his eyes gazing quietly out the window, fixed on the unfolding landscape. No one said anything else, but one thing was undeniably clear today. The silence had been broken, not with shouting or accusations, but with the right act executed at the right time. A child who could not find the words to articulate her profound pain, a father who believed he could never truly forgive, and a woman who never learned how to genuinely love. They had finally reached each other through a moment that transcended the need for words. The county court session unfolded in a small, unassuming courtroom, not overly crowded. Outside, the weather was cold, a steady drizzle falling relentlessly, but inside, every single gaze was fixed intently upon three individuals, Sarah, Kevin, and Aunt Carol. Sarah sat perfectly still, her hair neatly tied back. Her hands, though not physically cuffed, trembled discernibly. Kevin fidgeted constantly, clearly unaccustomed to the courtroom's stifling silence. Aunt Carol, the woman who had once imperiously controlled every conversation, now sat quietly, assiduously avoiding meeting anyone's eyes. David was present, seated in the second row directly behind the prosecutor. Imani was not with him. She had, as her therapist had wisely recommended, stayed home with Grandma Evelyn. In the closing statement, the prosecutor read compelling excerpts from audio recordings, meticulously described the injury photographs, and recounted harrowing details from Imani's treatment journal. The evidence was presented clearly, coherently, with no need to raise his voice. "This is not a case, Your Honor, about sudden isolated evil," he articulated with grave solemnity, "but about prolonged systemic silence, about a devastating chain of neglect, abuse, and deliberate concealment where the only true victim was a vulnerable child who did not possess the vocabulary to articulate her own profound suffering." The judge looked directly at Sarah, his voice calm, yet imbued with an unshakable authority. "Sarah Montgomery, as the legal guardian, you are hereby sentenced to 4 years in prison without the possibility of suspension for the substantiated abuse of a minor." Then he turned to Kevin. "Richard Kevin Jenkins, you are convicted of emotional harassment of a child involving threats and intimidation. You are sentenced to 18 months in prison with supervised probation." And finally, Aunt Carol, the individual few, had expected to be held accountable, yet whose insidious role could not under any circumstances be overlooked. Carol Jenkins, while you did not yourself commit physical acts of violence, the court finds you unequivocally guilty of incitement and willful enabling of domestic abuse. You are sentenced to 2 years probation and are permanently prohibited from any contact whatsoever with your granddaughter, Imani Vance, and any other minor. Tears slid silently down Sarah's cheeks. She did not protest. She did not plead. Her shoulders simply sagged as if at long last she could no longer bear the immense weight of holding herself upright. A few days subsequent to the hearing, Imani returned to therapy with David. Lorraine, the silver-haired psychologist with a voice as soft as tissue paper, stepped out from the back room and offered them a quiet, understanding nod. No words were needed. Her presence alone conveyed a profound empathy. She opened the door, and David entered with Imani. "I want to draw today," Imani murmured softly, her voice still slow, still hesitant, but no longer laced with the chilling threads of fear. David sat in the corner of the room, not too close, not too far, a silent, comforting presence. He watched his hands resting in his lap, careful not to make any sudden movement that might disrupt the fragile quiet forming painstakingly between them. Imani picked up a brown crayon, then a vibrant green, then a pale, hopeful orange. A picture began slowly, gracefully to take shape on the paper, a house with a red-tiled roof, a small, inviting chimney letting out a thin, ethereal trail of smoke. The windows were adorned with cheerful purple curtains, and outside, a verdant garden bloomed with 2 apple trees, heavy with ripening fruit. A swing was drawn in dotted lines, but clear enough beneath the trees. 2 figures were depicted sitting, one tall, with dark hair, the other small, leaning contentedly on the taller one's shoulder. Lorraine did not rush in. She waited patiently until Imani set the crayon down, then gently asked, "Who are they, sweetheart?" Imani tilted her head. Then she turned and looked directly at David, her face lighting up with just a flicker of light in her eyes. "It's home. It's me and Daddy." David swallowed hard, saying nothing, his throat tight with emotion. He smiled quietly, one hand resting on his knee, the other clenched tightly in his lap, a silent testament to the storm of emotions raging within him. The days that followed passed gently, serenely, as if even the very air within the house had somehow learned to move with a newfound softness. David began waking up earlier, long before the sun had fully risen. He meticulously warmed Imani's milk to the exact temperature the doctor had meticulously recommended, and he practiced making toast, striving for it to be just crisp enough without the slightest hint of burning the edges. He had been a decorated Special Forces soldier accustomed to the rigorous demands of combat, but he had never in his entire life cooked for anyone, never learned the simple domestic skill of reading toothpaste labels for a 6-year-old. In the afternoons, he drove Imani to school in his trusty pickup truck. In the evenings, they engaged in word games with little wooden tiles, their laughter echoing softly through the quiet rooms. Sometimes they simply colored together in comfortable silence, their shared presence a balm. David did not ask, "Do you remember anything?" He did not push, "You have to forgive." He was simply there, present every single day. One rainy night, after meticulously finishing the storybook, The Little Girl and the Silent Forester, which Imani had carefully selected from the school library, David closed the cover and began to rise from her bedside. Imani tugged gently at his arm, her voice barely a whisper imbued with a fragile hope. "Daddy?" He turned back, waiting patiently. "You're staying right." David did not answer right away. He stepped closer, sat down by the bed, and laid his hand reassuringly on the blanket covering hers. "I'm not going anywhere, my love. Even if you're sad or angry or quiet, I'm staying. Always." Emily nodded, then for the very first time pulled the blanket up to her shoulders herself, without waiting for an adult to help her. A tiny smile flickered across her lips, just enough for David to catch it, like the subtle ripple on the surface of a glass of water when someone brushes past. The next morning, David was meticulously fixing a leaky faucet in the kitchen when Imani came running in a pristine sheet of drawing paper clutched tightly in her hand. She did not utter anything. She climbed up on a chair, grabbed some tape, and carefully stuck the paper onto the refrigerator door. David wiped his hands clean and walked over. The drawing depicted 2 people standing in the rain, David tall and strong in a coat, and Imani small and determined holding a vibrant umbrella. At their feet was a small reflective puddle, and slanted lines all around them suggested the presence of the wind. Up in the left-hand corner, scrawled in uneven yet bold letters, was one powerful word, home. The H was written backward, but the strokes were undeniable clear. David stood still. No one had taught Imani to write that profound word. No one had told her what this house was truly supposed to be. But she had written it. No explanation was needed. No caption was required. The answer was right there in the shaky, earnest lines of the drawing between the two figures, standing resolutely in the rain, still holding each other's hand. There was no applause, no grand speech, just a single sheet of paper taped to the fridge door with two small pieces of tape, like a sacred sign that both of them quietly understood. From now on, this is home. Autumn leaves a myriad of fiery reds and burnt oranges drifted steadily onto the suburban road. The breeze was light, devoid of rain, but the perpetually overcast sky made everything seem to move a little slower, imbued with a quiet contemplation. David stepped out of headquarters holding a plain brown envelope. No recipient name, just two handwritten words slanted slightly, Imani Jane. The letter had come from the North County Psychological Recovery Center, verified by an official stamp. Sarah Montgomery had written it a week ago, sending it to David's temporary address, which had then been passed along by a diligent caseworker. David had read it once, then carefully folded it. He didn't tear it up. He didn't throw it away. He placed it carefully in the drawer beside his bed. Each night he opened it, not to reread its contents, but just to ensure it was still there, a tangible link to a complex past. The letter was 3 pages long, the handwriting still firm, though it shook noticeably in places. If there exists another life, Imani, all I sincerely hope is that you will never ever refer to anyone as mother except your biological mother. But if you could just once, just one single time call me, that I would dedicate the remainder of this journey attempting with every fiber of my being to earn it. Sarah didn't beg for forgiveness. She didn't offer excuses. She only wrote about her days within the facility, the grueling therapy group sessions, the sleepless nights, when she vividly saw the little girl of her dreams standing in the corner of the room, holding that old worn teddy bear, watching in profound, unsettling silence. David didn't know what precisely to do with the letter. Imani had never asked about Sarah, never once mentioned her name. Dr. Lorraine had wisely advised, "There's no rush, David. A child doesn't require the entire truth all at once. But one day, she will need it told in a voice that is honest, yet devoid of bitterness." David remembered those words. That Saturday morning, David was meticulously fixing the car in the garage. The air was chilly, and a low, calm voice on the radio delivered the traffic report. Imani was inside, engrossed in drawing on her tablet. Lately she had been drawing a multitude of houses with welcoming doors, tall trees, and bright windows. No more dark confined rooms, no more desolate corners. Close to noon, the front gate buzzer rang. David stepped out. Imani was already there, her hands on her hips, her ponytail slightly off to one side, her cheeks rosy from the brisk cold. The gate swung open with a familiar creak, and she ran toward him, her arms flung wide. "You're 5 minutes late," she declared, pretending to scold him. David let out a soft, amused laugh. "I hit a red light, my love." Imani took his hand, said nothing else. They walked back into the house together. Behind them, the gate eased shut with a familiar creak, a sound that used to feel cold and unwelcoming, but didn't anymore. In the evening, Imani took her new drawing and carefully taped it to the wall, right next to the refrigerator. The picture showed a house with the lights on, emanating a warm glow. The door was wide open. Out in the yard stood 2 figures, one big, one small. There was an apple tree heavy with fruit beside them and a stone bench. On the bench's surface, a letter was drawn in pale gray with gentle strokes. David looked at it but didn't ask. Imani didn't explain either, but as David turned back to the kitchen to pour himself a glass of water, she spoke quietly behind him. "I think, Daddy, that if someone accidentally went the wrong way for a while, but truly deeply wanted to come back, then the door should be open." David set the glass down. He stood still for a moment, absorbing her profound wisdom. "You're right, my love," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "but not every door needs to open right away. Some need time to be knocked on the right way." Imani nodded, then she turned and ran off to her room, her small footsteps tapping evenly on the wooden floor. At the very end of the hallway, she stopped. "Dad, yeah, please don't lock the door." "Okay, never, my love," David replied, his voice resounding with an unwavering promise. The door's always open. The story of David and Imani as it unfolded in The Unlocked Hearth offers a gentle reminder that some of life's deepest transformations are found not in grand pronouncements, but in the unwavering promise of presence and the quiet courage to heal. It beautifully illustrates how a father's protective love, patiently rebuilding a sense of home and safety, One gentle moment at a time can mend what was broken and foster a brave new beginning. Imani's journey, moving from silent fear in a dark corner to finding solace in sketching a home with an open door, reminds us that true strength lies in vulnerable trust and the quiet resilience of a spirit learning to breathe freely again. This isn't just a story of overcoming hardship, but of the tender grace found in profound connection and the enduring hope of a love that never lets go. As you reflect on David and Imani's journey, what does home truly symbolize for you, and what small acts of unwavering love or presence have helped you feel profoundly safe and cherished? We invite you to share your heartfelt thoughts in the comments below, creating a space where we can connect through these deeply human experiences. If this story of quiet courage and the healing power of love has resonated with your heart, please consider liking this video, sharing it with someone who might find solace or inspiration, and subscribing to our channel to join a community dedicated to sharing narratives that illuminate the human spirit's capacity for hope and enduring connection. Thank you for walking alongside us and listening with such an open heart.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.